The difference between positive psychology and negative psychology is this. In positive psychology, it's possible to say what's going on, to define what's going on. It's possible to describe us in terms of our mental functioning. And what's more, in the positive paradigm of psychology, it's possible for us to fix ourselves or change ourselves in a meaningful way, by which I mean change ourselves in such a way that it's not just a trick, that we actually stay the way that we've changed ourselves to be. In other words, non-elastic change. And according to negative psychology, we can't know who we are or define who we are, and we can't know anything about um, our functioning, how we get to be here, and why we do whatever we do. We can't say anything about that because, according to negative psychology, who we are is spontaneous, like as Alan Watts says, like the wind can be spontaneous. The wind can suddenly change directions. We don't know if it's going to do it. It's not predictable. It's not obeying a bunch of rules. So there's this quality of something naturally happening. So natural is the relevant word because in nature everything is at root totally spontaneous. There's no director, in other words. In our heads, there might be a director. We might like to think that God is there directing every single thing that happens. And we might think that if he forgets to direct something, then it won't happen. So this puts a very onerous responsibility on the creator. But we think like that because we're obsessed with control and obsessed with making things happen the way we want them to happen. So we assume that the divine principle operates in the same way, by being a control freak, by having a plan and making everything adhere to that plan via threats, a mixture of threats and promises of reward. Now, all of that sounds suspiciously human to me. It doesn't sound particularly divine. But because we are obsessed with control and generally anything that comes out of the thinking mind, and the thinking mind is predicated upon control, it doesn't do anything else but control, can't ask nicely. Thinking mind bullies and cajoles, bullies and cajoles. The only way it knows is the way of force. And that's okay sometimes. Sometimes you got to force stuff. But when we force ourselves, then that's elasticated change. As Jung says, it's elasticated change because we try and we try and we try. We're essentially putting on an act. And then when we get tired of putting on the act, when we get exhausted, everything snaps back again. And instead of being a street angel, we get miraculously transformed into the old house devil. So nothing's gained, in other words. Nothing is gained from, as Jung says, convulsively trying to change ourselves by pure force of will. We can kid ourselves that it's working, and who knows how long we can kid ourselves that it's working for if we keep on turning a blind eye to the whatever doesn't match. But it's not real, and someone's going to be suffering. So if I am trying really hard to be a pillar of society, etc., and I'm forceful about it, if I'm using my will to bring that about, then all I'm doing is stretching an elastic band and it's going to ping back very painfully. Maybe not on me, maybe on someone else, but it's going to ping back all the same. So that's convulsive or elastic change. It's also like we can compare it to the game of whack-a-mole because we can fix things, but then something else will go wrong. We'll fix that, and then something else will go wrong again, and eventually we'll get right back to where we started, but we won't remember that, so we'll just carry on in the groove of fixing. And as we succeed, as we can do sometimes temporarily when it's our own behavior we're talking about, then we can feel good about it. We feel that we're in control, and that's a good feeling. We confuse the feeling of being in control with being mentally healthy. Whereas it's actually antithesis of mental health to be in control because nothing's happening freely. And if we're not happening freely, or if everything is being forced, then it's meaningless because it's going to, whatever I assert myself to say is true, I'm going to start doubting. And by asserting anything, I create the opposite. That's what happens with forcing. So although there is a time lag that I can get positive results, and in that time lag, I can get euphoric, I can get a euphoria high, and forget about the bigger picture. But then the wheel turns and I go into despair, I go into dysphoria, I go into the darkness. But I don't link that with the self-assertion in the first euphoria, part of the euphoria dysphoria cycle. I just think it's just something else coming from somewhere that I can fix in the same way that I fix everything else. So we're hooked on fixing. We're addicted to fixing, and it's a circus. It goes on and on forever. But it's just as long as we only concentrate on the immediate future, the short term, I can quite easily believe that I'm making progress, that I'm doing okay. Things are coming along. Even though there can be no such thing as positive really when there's forcing, because forcing isn't real. If change is real, then it must happen by itself. It must be a bigger thing involved than just my petulant little willpower, my willfulness saying, I want this, or I don't want that, or I want to be like this. That's a very small thing, and it can change. It's fickle. It can change many times in the day. But it can't accomplish anything. And that's what Gurdjieff meant when he says man cannot do. He can't do because everything is just this little bit of willfulness, this tiny little movement of the rational ego issuing instructions or commands to the universe that it expects to be obeyed, and allowing itself to believe that it is being obeyed, that it is a potent force for change. So when the rational ego gets to believe that it genuinely is a potent force for change, then that's the euphoric phase of the ego. That's the bit we like, it's the juicy bit, the nice bit. It's like, yeah, it's a rush. It's the biggest rush there is. The self which we aren't, the false self, is getting validated. And that validation makes it seem temporarily, in a superficial kind of a way, real to us. And so because this is what we most want in life, we keep on going for it. We keep on asserting the self, asserting the ego. And we worship this as a society, we worship it. Why else do we talk about chasing our dreams and achieving our goals? That's asserting, I want it to be so, let it be so, make it be so, etc., etc. It's forcefulness, it's aggression, it's violence, and it's so normal. The ego can't be anything else but violent. It can be tricky, it can be flattering, it has its way of getting its own way without showing what it's doing. But that's still aggression. That's still violence. It's just clever aggression, clever violence. And when that doesn't work, or if it doesn't work, we'll go back into the old-fashioned type of violence, the old-fashioned type of conflict, which is human life is full of. That's our that's what we do every day. We go from one conflict to another, and we get petulant when we can't assert our will, or when someone else asserts their will over us, or when we can't assert our intellectual will and say what reality is, and someone else trumps us, and they get to say what reality is instead and disagree with us. So that's the type of stuff that goes on. And when we meet people who agree with us, then that feels good. So we hang out with people who agree with us, but they're not really agreeing with us, because whatever the position we're taking is, it's not really our position, it's a position that we've identified with, that we've thought, yes, this is true, and everyone else has identified with it. And the advantage of having a viewpoint like that, which is like everyone else's, is that you will meet people who agree with you and you can hang out with them. But that's all very superficial, because you've agreed, or everyone in that collective has agreed to agree on whatever it is they agree with, or agree on, not for the sake of arriving at the truth or anything noble like that, but for the sake of fitting in, for the sake of being approved of or accepted by the group. So the assumptions that lie behind positive psychology are the assumptions that lie behind our culture itself. So that makes the assumptions pretty much, well, more than pretty much, it makes them 100% unquestionable. We'll never question them. In other words, we think the willful acts of the ego can bear fruit. Keep on trying. Get there in the end. And yet, this is only true within the fantasy of life, within our collective fantasy of life, where real psychological facts can be obtained procedurally by doing the procedure, which is a weird thing when you get to reflect on it, because if my mental health can be achieved via a procedure, and a procedure is a generic type of thing, it's the same for everybody, that reduces me to a generic person, a generic entity, a generic thing. So, in one sense, we can say that positive psychology is appropriate or fits the bill or makes sense, in the sense that we believe ourselves to be the person the mind tells us we are. So, to the extent that we believe we are who we seem to be in the game, as has been orchestrated by thought or orchestrated by society, where we get to be this person who we know and can describe, and which can exert itself successfully via the action of personal willpower, volition. So as long as we totally believe ourselves to be this, and self, as is not really ourself, then we can say that positive psychology can help repair the illusion. If the illusion gets damaged, as the illusion always will get damaged because illusions are inherently precarious things, and they get damaged very easily. There's a lot of truth out there. In fact, there's nothing but truth out there. So that's a pretty hostile environment for an illusion. But we can assume that there is a certain amount of leeway for the poor beleaguered self-image, which is starting to lose its touch, which is starting to not feel so good, which is starting to feel a bit dysphoric, to repair itself, to fix itself up to a certain point by using positive psychology. So in this sense, we can say that positive psychology, positive psychological therapy is helpful. In this very narrow sense, and only in this very narrow sense. The bigger picture of that is, of course, that anything which helps to repair or fix up or in whatever way regenerate self-image and is good for the self-image in that it restores its integrity to function within the game in the way that it wants to, i.e. totally unconsciously. So we can say it's good within that context, but very, very bad for us outside of that context, naturally.